You've got kids in your class that are unwilling to pick up a book and read, and they may even be proud of the fact that they don't read. What do you do to help those kids? That's coming up in this video. Hi, everybody. I'm Lee Hall from Literacy Teachers, and I'm all about giving you the tools to inspire, motivate, and change how your students read and write for academic success. If this is your first time here, welcome. This is the place to come for tips and advice on how to improve your literacy instruction to meet the needs of your students. Today, we're going to be talking to Daria Plumb, and Daria is going to be giving us all kinds of advice on how to help students who might not be super excited to want to read. So let's go over and hear what she has to say. All right, welcome everybody. Today we have Daria Plumb with us. Thank you, Daria, for joining us.
Thank you.
Daria is a high school English teacher. She's got a ton of experience that she is going to share with us today, particularly around helping students who might be identified as reluctant readers. So Daria taught English and social studies for 21 years in an alternative high school. Now she's in a more traditional setting, teaching freshman English and working with at-risk juniors and seniors who are also credit deficient. So what we're going to be doing, because Daria, you have a wealth of experience here with working with reluctant readers and understanding their point of view and what might get them, more engaged with reading. And so I'm thinking we can just sort of start here. You've got this lovely document. I just want everybody to know that what you're going to be seeing, Daria created. We're going to be going through this a little bit, highlighting some things, and then there will be a link to it in the show notes, so you will be able to access it there. For starters, these are some of the words, right, that we typically use to describe reluctant readers. You want to tell us a little bit about what we're looking at here?
Yeah, so I think generally the word we use the most is reluctant or possibly resistant. I know in working with alternative ed kids, resistant was often the way I would have described my kids. It wasn't just that they didn't want to read, they were proud non-readers. And they identified themselves as non-readers. But in working with them over a period of 10 or 15 years, I started to realize that they weren't really reluctant or resistant. They were very inexperienced as readers. So that is the word that I would use the most to describe these kind of kids. It's not that they necessarily don't want to read, it's that they've not had good experiences with books, and therefore they are not good readers. And so then they self-identify as non-readers because that's their defense mechanism. And go ahead.
I was gonna say, that's what I have found in working with middle schoolers, is that they, when they're 13, 14 years old, if you sit down and talk to them, they can share with you this wealth of negative reading experiences that they've had, they can cite all the way back to first grade. They can say in first grade, here's this really bad thing that happened to me, and then they just sort of kept, these bad things just sort of kept happening to me, so I've checked out. And it's not that they don't want to be better readers. It's just that, they don't have these good positive experiences with themselves as readers. And so finding a way to create those for them as a middle school teacher, as a high school teacher, then becomes really important, I think.
Absolutely. And my kids, when I would ask them, when trying to pair them with the book, the first thing I would say is, have you ever read anything you've liked? And if they had a yes answer at all, they were many times digging way back to like fifth grade when teachers were still doing read alouds with them. There wasn't anything they'd read on their own that they actually identified as being something that they enjoyed reading. And most of them, if assigned a book, wouldn't finish anything.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of teachers they've had these experiences. They know these kids.
Oh, they're everywhere.
They're everywhere. Right. But
they're in your high level classes and your low level classes. They're all through the grade levels. Yeah.
Right. Because you can be a very high level reader and have zero interest in wanting to read. It's not necessarily, I think this is an important distinction about the skills that you possess. Yeah.
True.
So you've got in here the Reader's Bill of Rights, which I think, have you presented these to your students?
Yes, we used to have those on the door of my classroom because we would do a lot of sustained silent reading and a lot of choice reading. So I would give that to them sort of right out the gate when I was doing that particular kind of class. And I wanted them to know that our goal was to get them to enjoy reading a book. Not that they would necessarily finish something, not that they would be able to produce a book report or a project on it, but that they would just like a book.
Mm-hmm. And your students then, you had them come up with their own, right, Bill of Rights, or things that they would add to this. So let's take a look at that. What are some things that you think are important here for teachers to know that's on this list?
Well, I think the first one is super important. Lots of kids put down that they thought that it was okay to judge a book by its cover. And that's the old adage, right? Don't judge a book by its cover. But I think we all do it. Publishers recognize that we do it, because if you go to a convention center where there are publishers that have display booths, everything is shelved face out. The cover art is amazing. It's eye-catching. And how else are you going to decide if something looks interesting from the outside? The other one that I think is really important is this right not to read out loud. And that by that they meant that we wouldn't force them to do like that kind of popcorn thing where you call on them and put them on the spot. Mm-hmm. I think that one's really important. And the one that I think was maybe the most surprising to me was this right to feel emotions while you're reading. You know, that I think most of my kids, when I asked them to help me generate this list, had never read a book that made them feel something. And so then when it happened to them, they were just amazed and thought that this was something that we should like share with other teachers and other kids, that it's okay to laugh or cry while you're reading a book.
And so if I'm a middle school teacher or a high school teacher and I want to do this activity with my students, sort of have them generate, their own Bill of Rights, what would you suggest? What's a good way for teachers to go about having students come up with this?
We did this after my kids had sort of come on board with the idea of reading. So it wasn't necessarily something we did right out the gate. They probably, had I given this to them in September, would not know what they wanted to add to the list because they hadn't been reading and they didn't consider themselves to be readers. So I think that they need some experience first. And then I just literally gave them the Bill of Rights, copied on a sheet of paper and said, now, what do you think other teachers or other people who work with teenagers need to know?
Right, because even though you're an English teacher, this applies in any classroom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the school district I'm in right now, in our high school, a lot of non-English classes are using sustained silent reading at least once or twice a week, which I think is amazing. And I think that everybody sort of needs to be on board with what sustained silent reading is meant to do and meant to look like. And, in most cases, I would say it's meant to give kids time to read for pleasure.
Right. I think you want to set up that context so that they actually experience that pleasure.
Yeah.
I think, for me, the one thing that I really liked, the right to read all kinds of books.
Yes.
And to change books. But I can remember as a middle school teacher, we would do sustained silent reading, and my team did it at the same time. And I can still remember the math teacher coming to get me because we had a lot of English language learners, and so we just filled the room with like a variety of books. We didn't care. We just filled the rooms with books. And the math teacher had brought in The Pokey Little Puppy, because it had been a favorite book of hers when she was a kid, and I read that book too, right? It's like a kindergarten, first grade book, and there was a kid in the back of the room, and he just loved The Pokey Little Puppy.
Yep.
And you know what? Good for you.
That's okay.
And nobody made fun of him. Actually, he was bigger than everybody, so nobody gave him a hard time.
Right.
But we really liked the fact that we were able to set something up where somebody felt, a 12 or 13-year-old boy felt completely okay to go pick up The Pokey Little Puppy. And he read it, not every day, but he would read it. It wasn't an uncommon thing to see him reading The Pokey Little Puppy. And he could read books that were way more challenging than that. But he got some kind of emotional pleasure or comfort from that book. And the other kids were fine with it. And I think that, to me, that's what this reminds me of, that you're going through it here.
Yeah, for sure. And I used to have, I didn't have a library in my alternative school, so I built one in my classroom. And so I would include a lot of things that were nonfiction books with a lot of graphic images and stuff, like Monster Nation, where they like redid the cars, because a lot of my boys were into vehicles. Or I would literally get books on like how to repair your Ford truck for certain kids to read during SSR, because as long as they were reading and they were engaged with something, I was fine with it. And I think that they respected me for respecting their choices.
Yes, I'm going to tell you yes, because I've actually, I did a research study a few years ago with an 8th grade English teacher, and we worked really hard. It wasn't about sustained silent reading, but it was just about valuing throughout the year who you wanted to become as a reader and letting kids develop that way, and her showing them, here's how what we're doing, how what I'm asking you to do is going to help you. And then she would also push on them to go a little bit further. And at the end of the year, the kids said, you know what? I am willing to do things that she asks of me that I might not normally be willing to do, because I see that she listens to me and she's trying to work with me around the things that are important to me. So I'm willing to take some chances and do things that I might not normally do around reading and instruction and things like that.
Absolutely. And when they see that you value their opinion, you know, if they say, I don't really like this book, can I switch to something else? And you ask them why and you value it instead of trying to change their mind or push them to continue, they will go almost anywhere with you. And then you get to the point where you can say to a kid, just try this. This book made me think of you and I think you'll like it. And they'll take it and they'll try it because they believe that you have their best interests at heart. Yes. And that you understand them.
Yes.
Yeah. And my kids would come to me and then say, hey, you have to read this book. Or I would catch them just on the sly, like recommending books to one another. Mm-hmm. And the things that I really liked is that they would come to me, and these are kids who are not students who generally cared about their grades or really had this pressure to like get A's and B's. And they would come up to my desk just totally organically and say, you know what? I'm reading a lot faster than I used to now that we've been doing all this reading, or my vocabulary is getting a lot better. I mean, these are like tough boys who like to work on cars and things like that, noticing that their skills were improving without even being prompted.
That's so
it was, you know, like an absolutely amazing experience.
Yeah. So this last part that you have here in the document is what your students say English teachers need to do to help students become better readers. So, and I think there's a couple of pages, is it one page? Yeah, so there's a few things on here. What is it that you think right now we should pay most attention to? What is your favorite on this list?
Well, the don't pick boring books. Don Gallo wrote an article for the English Journal many years ago now that talked about how English teachers are not viewed by their students as being good resources for reading materials, which is a really frightening commentary, that kids don't see us as people who know what good books are. And that's like our whole job, basically, right? I think that not picking boring books is a very important piece. When I would go to pick something, I would usually start with a read aloud with my kids, because most of them don't see the movie in the mind that readers see. So they didn't understand that, like, that's why people like to read. They can imagine the things unfolding and imagine the characters and the settings. So when I would try to pick something to read out loud, I had to pick something that right out on the first page, first sentence or two, had a totally catchy beginning. They weren't willing to wait 10 or 15 pages to find out that this book was going to hook them. You needed it on like page 1, maybe page 2 at the latest. And it needed to have, you know, action, suspense, or some kind of mystery in it. Those were the things my kids really liked the best.
Now, Alfred Tatum talks about this, and he talks about taking a book and just opening it up to the middle, like, and finding a really interesting, engaging passage and reading that to get kids hooked. And then kids want to go back to the beginning to find out, oh, how did that happen? How did that character get there? How did that scenario come about?
I never tried that. I think that's kind of an interesting concept. I worry for my kids that I had then that weren't experienced readers, that they would just be like, who is this dude and why do we care? You know what I mean? Like, I'd worry that they weren't going to be engaged enough to want to go back to the beginning. But that's something I would try next year with my freshmen. I think that's kind of a cool idea.
Now, is this something right here where you have, you know, what your students say, you know, teachers need to do? Is this something that you ask them at the end of the year?
I was getting ready to go present at the Michigan Council of Teachers of English Fall Conference. And so I said to them, look, I'm going to talk to English teachers. And most of my kids I had more than 1 year. So that would have been in October, but most of those kids I'd had for maybe the year prior as well. So they already sort of self-identified as readers. I'm like, this is your chance. What do all those teachers out there need to know? If you could just sit down with them, I can't take you all with me to Lansing, but if you could sit down with them, what do you need them to hear?
I bet they were excited.
Yeah, they just wrote, because I'm like, you guys are really the experts, right? There are lots of books and there are lots of articles, but you guys in the classroom, especially the kids who have not been traditionally very active readers, you're the ones every teacher is trying to figure out how to reach. So what have you got?
And
What can you tell me?
I think that's so important, right? Like you said, like we sit around and try to figure out, how do we help these kids? How do we reach them? But really, they know.
They do.
It is about, I think, ultimately forming these relationships with them so that they will trust you, so that they will, and they know that you have their best interest at heart. And then they say, here's what I need. And they will tell you. They really will.
Oh, for sure. And they can't always put it into words, but they'll tell you when they say, I don't like this book, it's dumb. If you do a little bit of digging, you can sort of get to what it is that's not hooking them. Is it that the character, they don't identify with the character, or the pacing is too slow? Or I even had kids that would disengage from a book because there were too many words on the page, not enough white space, those were things I never really thought about until I started talking to kids about what they needed in a book.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share this with us. It is
you're welcome.
Super informative. Now, I think also if teachers are thinking, well, what kinds of books can I use that high schoolers or adolescents in general might find engaging? You've got some recommendations, right?
I do. I always have recommendations, probably more than anybody ever wants. I would say right now, and because I think a lot of kids who are sort of inexperienced or reluctant happen to be boys, I love to recommend anything by Jason Reynolds. Okay. We just listened to the audio version of his newest book, In Verse, Long Way Down, with my freshmen at the end of the school year. And it is captivating and it's powerful. And there's a cliffhanger ending, which, alternately ticks them off, but it's great for like classroom discussion at the end, because they're screaming at me, why did you do this to us? Why? But it still gives them room to make their own decision about what the character is going to do next. So I love Jason Reynolds. Matt De La Pena, his books were really popular on rotation with my kids at Alternative, particularly Mexican White Boy and We Were Here. My kids really liked the Unwind series by Neil Shusterman. We read a ton of Terry Truman's books. We would usually do a read aloud with Stuck in Neutral. Again, a book with sort of an ambiguous ending. Short, fast, definitely quick paced. I most of the time stick with sort of gritty, realistic fiction, I think. I think for a kid who has never maybe seen their life reflected in the pages of a book, those are the ones that they can relate to the most. I've had kids really, really tune into like Ellen Hopkins books in verse, and Lori Haltz Anderson always is a favorite. If I have a girl that came to me that hasn't read Speak, that's my go-to like first book right from the start for most girls. It tells me really what they're willing to read. So those are always hits, I would say. Gary Paulson, all of his survivally outdoorsy books have a lot of appeal for boys and girls, I think. Chris Crutcher. So
yeah, you have a lot of information there. All right, so thank you so much, Daria, for taking the time to come and talk to us. Again, we are going to have this document will be linked in the show notes, so if you want to be able to see it, have access to it, read up on it and everything. And otherwise, head on down to the comments. Share with us your questions about working with reluctant readers, any kinds of difficulties you've had, successes that you've had, because we would love to hear your thoughts on this and be able to support you as you work with these students. So thank you so much.
Thank you.